My husband thinks I baby trapped him despite the baby being planned. Please help. My husband, 35M, and I, 32F, have been married for 7 years. We've always had a strong bond, built on friendship and trust. Ours felt like a fairy tale relationship from the start. He lived next door, and we just clicked. I've always thought the foundation of our marriage was unshakable, but now my husband is questioning everything, and I'm completely at a loss. Recently, his friend Jeff, 34M, confided in him about being baby-trapped. Jeff's wife, 32F, had stopped taking her birth control early in their relationship without telling him. She became pregnant and only admitted what happened after they got married. Jeff, who comes from a deeply conservative family, felt enormous pressure to marry her once she was pregnant. Even now, he feels trapped in the relationship, staying out of obligation rather than love. This revelation seems to have shaken my husband to his core. I'm currently 4 months pregnant with our first child, a pregnancy we planned together. But yesterday, my husband asked me, out of nowhere, if I had baby-trapped him. At first, I thought he was joking. I even laughed because it seemed so absurd. But when I realized he was serious, I tried to explain how ridiculous the idea was. We've been married for 7 years. How could having a baby now trap him more than our years together already have? Apparently, that answer didn't sit well with him. He told me there's no expiration date on being baby-trapped and accused me of having impure intentions. He claimed my reaction, laughing, was proof that I didn't take his concerns seriously and gave him no reason to trust me anymore. I was stunned. I didn't know how to respond. We've always made major decisions as a team, and this baby was no different. We talked about starting a family for months before trying. There was never any pressure from me. We were both on the same page. I suggested we take some time to cool off and revisit the conversation in the morning. But when I woke up, my husband was gone. He hadn't said where he was going, and I couldn't reach him. To make matters worse, I received an angry text from his younger brother, 28M, accusing me of forcing my husband into this pregnancy. It was completely out of line, and I can only assume my husband has been talking to him about our argument. Now, I'm left feeling confused, hurt, and unsure of what to do. My husband isn't answering my calls or messages, and I have no idea what he's thinking or where this is coming from. I'm trying to keep calm for the sake of the baby, but this situation is overwhelming. We've always been a team, and it breaks my heart to see him doubting me like this. How do I even begin to repair this? What can I do to help him see that this baby was planned together, out of love and excitement for our future? If anyone has been through something similar or has advice on how to move forward, I deeply appreciate it. I hope it's okay to post here again, but I wanted to give a quick update to everyone who took the time to share advice with me. I didn't get a chance to respond to individual comments because my previous post was locked fairly quickly, but I've read every single one and all the messages that came through. Thank you so much for your support and insights. It truly means a lot to me. As I went through the comments, I realized something important. I wasn't angry enough. Many of you pointed out how deeply insulting my husband's accusations were, not just to me, but to our entire marriage. At first, I was too overwhelmed by confusion and hurt to even process it fully, but as the reality of what he said began to sink in, so did the anger. Feeling emotionally untethered, I reached out to my best friend, 31F, who has been an absolute rock in my life. She came over almost immediately, armed with chocolate and a righteous fury on my behalf. As I poured my heart out to her, she listened intently, and her anger seemed to grow with every word I said. After I had vented everything, she called her husband, 34M, who is a family lawyer, to come over. When he arrived, he offered me not just his legal advice, but also his unwavering support. He told me, without hesitation, that he would help me if I decided to move forward with a divorce. He's already planning to draw up the paperwork on Monday. Honestly, I can't express how grateful I am for him and my best friend. They've been my anchor during this storm. A little while later, my mother-in-law, 66F, showed up at my house, practically dragging my husband behind her. Apparently, he had shown up at her house late the previous night, spouting the same nonsense about me baby-trapping him. Luckily, my MIL is an intelligent and strong-willed woman, and she absolutely tore into him for his behavior. She then insisted he come back with her today to apologize to me. When they arrived, my husband couldn't even meet my eyes. He mumbled out an apology, saying he was scared about becoming a father and had projected his insecurities onto me. He admitted he wasn't sure he was ready for the level of responsibility that fatherhood entails, but said he planned to step up. The way he phrased it, as if he were some kind of hero for doing the bare minimum, made my blood boil. I didn't hold back. I told him he was a coward for letting his fears lead him to accuse me of such a cruel thing. I made it clear that I needed space to process everything, and I told him to stay with his parents until I was ready to talk. I didn't mention the divorce papers. I want to wait until they're ready before bringing it up, especially since I'm not sure how he'll react. Before they left, I showed my MIL the text message I had received from my brother-in-law. Her expression darkened instantly, and I could see the storm brewing in her eyes. I'm not sure what will happen there, but I trust she won't let it slide. For now, I'm utterly exhausted, emotionally, mentally, and physically. My best friend has offered to stay the night with me, and we've planned to watch some silly movies to lighten the mood. I've also scheduled an appointment with a therapist for next week because I know I need professional support to navigate everything that's happening. This whole situation has left me devastated. It's heartbreaking to see the life and marriage I believed in so deeply fall apart so suddenly. I'm trying to focus on taking care of myself and my baby, but the weight of it all is crushing. Thank you to everyone who shared your thoughts, advice, and kind words. I don't have a happy ending to share right now, but I hope that with time, things will start to feel less heavy. For now, I just need rest. I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone for their kind messages and thoughtful advice. I've received so many requests for an update, so I thought I'd let you all know how things are going. Overall, life has settled down a little, though it's been a whirlwind of emotions. On a positive note, I recently had a scan with my doctor, and I'm thrilled to share that the baby is healthy and growing perfectly. Even more exciting, I found out I'm having a little girl. I'm absolutely over the moon. My mother-in-law, MIL, came with me to the appointment, and she was deeply touched that I included her. She was so emotional during the scan and is overjoyed about becoming a grandmother. After the scan, my MIL organized a family lunch to bring everyone together. At first, I wasn't sure about going. It felt daunting, but I knew her intentions were good, and she assured me she wouldn't let anything escalate. When I arrived, my husband and brother-in-law, BIL, were there along with my father-in-law, FIL, and MIL. The atmosphere was tense, to say the least. No one seemed to know how to start, and it was uncomfortably quiet until my MIL finally spoke up, asking if anyone had something to say. My BIL was the first to break the silence. He apologized for the cruel text he had sent me, admitting that he'd let his emotions take over in the heat of the moment. He said he only wanted to support his brother, but realized now how hurtful his words had been. I didn't hold back as I explained how deeply his message had affected me, especially considering he knew how long my husband and I had been trying for this baby. He seemed genuinely ashamed and barely managed to mumble before falling silent for the rest of the lunch. Then came my husband's turn. My MIL gave him a pointed look, clearly expecting him to speak up, but he avoided making eye contact with anyone. When it became clear he wouldn't start on his own, my MIL took charge. She announced that my husband was no longer welcome to stay in their home, saying she was ashamed of how he had behaved and didn't want a lowlife hanging around. Her words clearly struck a nerve with him, but it wasn't until she mentioned the granddaughter on the way that he truly reacted. His eyes lit up, and suddenly he was in tears, saying how thrilled he was to find out he was having a girl. He had always wanted a daughter and became emotional, reaching out to touch my belly and asking if he could come home to help paint the nursery. I didn't mince words. I told him he wasn't welcome in my home. He had shattered my trust, and I couldn't allow someone in my life who would crumble at the first sign of difficulty. I reminded him that when things got hard, he had accused me of something unthinkable and abandoned me. When he asked if I was ending our marriage, I calmly told him I had already hired a lawyer. Surprisingly, I felt calm, almost detached. Normally, I'm an emotional person and would have been crying, but in that moment, it was as if a protective shield had wrapped around me. My husband, however, became frantic, claiming it was unfair that I was throwing away our life together over what he called a little panic. He said I was denying him the chance to be a father to our daughter. Before I could respond, my FIL spoke up, reminding my husband that this was the same baby he had accused me of using to trap him just weeks ago. My husband tried to brush it off as a mistake made under stress, but my MIL wasn't having it. She asked him to imagine how I must have felt, vulnerable, carrying his child, and then accused of such a terrible thing by the person I trusted most. I told him how crushed I had felt when he left. I had envisioned a beautiful life and family together, only for it to fall apart in an instant. He said he still wanted those things, but I told him that his panic wasn't a good enough excuse for the pain he had caused. He didn't have much of a response beyond insisting he was ready now and wanted to be there for his daughter. Through all of this, he never once gave me a genuine apology. Eventually, the lunch wrapped up. My MIL stood firm on her decision to keep him out of her home. When he asked again if he could come back to my house, I made it clear it wasn't an option. I reminded him that I owned the house before we married and that it needed to be a safe space for me and our baby. As far as I know, he's staying in a hotel. On Friday, he was served divorce papers at work. My best friend's husband had drafted them earlier, but I took my time to ensure this was the right step. Since then, I've received multiple missed calls and tearful voicemails where he begged me to reconsider. He even sent a selfie of himself crying in his car, which my best friend and I couldn't help but laugh at. My MIL called me after learning about the papers and assured me I was making the right choice. She admitted she never wanted things to end this way, but promised to stand by me and my baby. She even tried to apologize on her son's behalf, but I told her it wasn't her responsibility. His actions are his alone to own. This weekend, my best friend stayed by my side. We went baby clothes shopping to bring some joy into an otherwise overwhelming time. She has been my rock, and her husband has been a huge help with the legal process. I don't know exactly what the future holds, but for now, I feel a sense of peace. I'm confident I'm making the right decisions for myself and my little girl. I'll update again if anything significant happens, but for now, my focus is on getting through this chapter and welcoming my baby into a loving, stable world. Wish us luck. Now on to the next story, story 2. The guy I'm dating has a shrine to my ex-husband in his house. The guy I've been dating, 36M, has something in his house that left me completely stunned. A literal shrine to my ex-husband. For context, I'm 37F and was married for 7 years to someone who's a bit of a celebrity. I put that word in quotes because while many of you might not recognize his name, he's considered A-list in the world of metal music. If you're into metal, you've definitely heard of him. Our marriage ended on good terms, mostly because his life revolved around constant touring. In the beginning, I loved being on the road with him, but over time, it became exhausting. I started craving stability, and eventually, we realized we were heading in different directions. We decided to part ways, but stayed in occasional contact. Despite everything, he's a genuinely great guy, and I've always respected him. Fast forward to 2 weeks ago, when I met someone new through a mutual friend. We hit it off immediately, and we've been on 3 dates so far. The first 2 were casual drinks after work, and he showed up both times wearing nice khakis and a button-down shirt. Based on his appearance, I'd never have guessed he was into metal or anything remotely edgy. On our latest date, he invited me to his house to watch a movie. It was a purely platonic plan. We're taking things slow physically. His house was really nice, and I couldn't help but ask for a tour. He showed me the upstairs first, and everything looked fairly normal. Then he said he had something special to show me, his game room. We headed down to the basement, which was fully furnished and impressive. It had a pool table, a mini bar, and even a dartboard. But then I noticed something unusual. Every wall in the room was covered with memorabilia dedicated to my ex-husband. I was floored. He had framed posters of all my ex's bands, autographed guitars, and every record my ex ever released, neatly framed and displayed. There were even magazine articles featuring him, carefully preserved and hung up like works of art. It was like stepping into a museum dedicated to my ex. The whole situation was surreal. My date is clearly a massive fan of my ex, but he has no idea about the connection. He knows I'm divorced, but I've never told him who my ex-husband is. In that moment, I just didn't know what to say. I froze and kept my mouth shut, feeling overwhelmed by the bizarre coincidence. Now we're supposed to meet again tonight for our 4th date, and I know I can't keep this to myself any longer. I really like him, and I can see potential for something long-term between us. But how do I break this news without it derailing everything? I'm worried he'll freak out or feel awkward once he realizes his idol is my ex. Should I tell him before we meet up or wait until we're together? And how do I even approach this conversation without making it weird? I regret not saying anything when I first saw his game room, but I was honestly in shock. If anyone has advice on how to handle this, I'd really appreciate it. I want to be honest, but I also don't want to scare him off. What would you do in my shoes? After receiving a wide range of responses to my initial post, some of which honestly made me a little nervous, I decided to give the new guy the benefit of the doubt. I wanted to see how things would unfold, so I went ahead with our dinner date that evening, which was our 4th date. We met at the restaurant, and everything started out pretty normal. We ordered some wine, and the conversation flowed easily, just like on our previous dates. As we sipped our second glasses, I realized it was now or never. I had to bring up the elephant in the room. I took a deep breath and asked him directly if he knew that I used to be married to his favorite musician. At first, he laughed nervously, which threw me off, but then he admitted, "Yes, I knew." That caught me by surprise, but what really floored me was his explanation. He said he hadn't learned it from my friend, as I might have assumed. Instead, he'd figured it out on his own through the grapevine. Apparently, once he discovered this little detail about me, he went out of his way to mingle with my friends to orchestrate a meeting between us. He even confessed that initially, his interest in me was mostly because I was the ex-wife of his idol. But he quickly followed up by saying that his feelings had grown, and now he genuinely liked me for who I am. At that moment, I didn't know how to feel. On one hand, it was flattering that he was so taken by me, but on the other, the way he'd gone about it felt calculated. Then I remembered his man cave, basement, and all the memorabilia. So, I asked him outright, if you knew I was married to your favorite musician, why would you bring me down there and show me all of that? His response made my stomach turn. He said, "I wanted to see if you'd confess." Confess? Confess to what? I stared at him in disbelief and asked, "What are you talking about?" He clarified, "I wanted to see if you'd admit you were married to him." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just an awkward coincidence, it was downright manipulative. I told him his little test was concerning and made it clear I didn't think we were compatible. To my surprise, he accepted my decision without much fuss. He didn't argue, didn't get upset. He just nodded. Dinner had already been served by then, so we decided to finish the meal. That's when things took another weird turn. Out of nowhere, he started firing off questions about my ex-husband. When is he releasing new music? What's his favorite band? What does he usually do on the day of a show? Is he vegan? It felt endless. I even joked in my head that he was about to ask me for my ex's mother's maiden name.
It was exhausting.
The more he talked, the more uncomfortable I became. Finally, he must have sensed my discomfort because he suggested we wrap things up. When we parted ways, he said he'd text me the next day. But just as friends, I agreed, thinking that would be the end of it. The next day, however, his text was anything but friendly. He immediately asked if I could help him and his friends get VIP passes when my ex comes to town. I didn't respond, but that didn't stop him. He kept texting again and again, practically begging for the hookup. It was desperate and unsettling. At that point, I had enough. I blocked his number and decided to call my ex, not because I felt physically unsafe, but to give him a heads up about this guy. I don't think he's dangerous. He doesn't know where I live, and I didn't get any serious psycho vibes. But his obsession with my ex and his attempts to use me as some sort of trophy were gross. As one Redditor pointed out in my original post, it really felt like he was more interested in what I represented than in who I actually am. I'm just glad I spotted the red flags before things went any further.
You.
Thanks, Reddit, for helping me dodge that bullet.